Opening on the Maru, our crew is being attacked by Nietzschean slavers. There's no good escape routes, and the Maru is forced to land on a planet. Somehow, after dumping their fuel, Becca is able to make what looks like a semi-controlled descent. Guess she's just that good of a pilot? After the credits, Harper is having a meltdown. His PTSD is getting to him. As someone who suffers, I can't really fault him for the crew insisting he get back to work after, a week. So, don't get me wrong, some people deal with trauma through work, but if that isn't your personality build, then it's not going to take, no matter how hard you force it. Luckily, Dylan's alive, with a wound on the side of his face that didn't hit the deck. It's a minor quip, but just more proof that they didn't have the money to do reshoots in Andromeda. During repairs, Rev is having difficulty concentrating. Turns out that he has been fasting and was planning on breaking it as soon as they return to the Andromeda. That obviously isn't happening now, and he can't eat the emergency rations on the Maru, as Magog need to kill to begin their digestive process, which, since Rev has been a Maru crew member for 7 years at this point, seems weird. You could have an emergency terrarium with giant cockroaches or snakes or something. Rev says he keeps a salmon on board the Andromeda for the purpose, but it's difficult to imagine the Maru had room for a whole-ass fish tank. So how did he handle that living on this bucket? It's a tiny nag, but it stays with me because it's the central conflict of the B-plot of this episode. There's even more logical loopholes that buoy the episode, but hurt the fridge logic at play. And Tyr is having none of it, saying they should chain Rev up. While Becca and Dylan trust Rev's word that he can handle it, for now, Tyr's experience aboard the world ship is really shooting on all cylinders, barely able to maintain his composure when his request to accompany Dylan on scouting is refused. It's a interesting foil to the way Harper is dealing with the same trauma. I have to say this week's Planet Canada is beautiful, using the natural snow to give us a setting rarely seen on sci-fi. An outdoor snowy landscape is rare. Most sci-fi handles their snow planets in cave settings, but this is just refreshing to look at. The fact that you can see the actors and stuntmen really trudging through the snow and toppling snowbanks is an environmental touch that makes this one stand out in the memory. Dylan finds the region is geologically unstable, however. Tyr and Becca are having a chat in the Maru, and Becca has sussed out the truth.
Who are those Nietzscheans?
I've told you. Slavers.
Slavers are 9-to-5 bad guys. When the going gets tough, they find easier marks. They wouldn't care enough to chase us through Slipstream.
Then who are they?
Why don't you tell me?
But Tyr is mum on who he might have pissed off. Meanwhile, Dylan encounters said Nietzscheans and proceeds to perform the exact same pratfall he did during the Maru crash. Is this to protect his hair? What is this? Becca has a good scene with Rev where she's lamenting what she hates about planets, which is basically everything, from the dirt to the smell of the air to the water. She's a spacer through and through. It's her awkward way of trying to keep Rev's mind occupied. The blocking in this shot is great, and State's acting the hell out of his role in this episode all around. We get the feeling of how hemmed in Rev feels by his biology, just by the position of the camera. It's not hard to see why this early stretch of Season 2 was the highest rated in the show's history. Meanwhile, Tyr has concluded that Dylan has been off far too long and comes to save him. But at that point, the Nietzscheans start calling to him by name.
We know you're out there! Give up! Maybe we'll let you live! Get it!
Anything you want to tell me?
No, not particularly.
Getting back to the ship, the crew realizes the geological instability is actually the result of these creatures called squirms, giant rockworms that digest rock and excrete pure metal as a waste product. Rev tries to give us an after-school lecture on the stuff, but his hunger is making it hard for him to concentrate. Finally breaking down and trying to eat the emergency rations meant for the human members of the crew, but they're incompatible with his anatomy. Great advertising, though.
The brand new burger you can fuck. This burger is better than sex. You can fuck this burger. Only at Burger King you can stick your dick in this burger. Your balls will explode, guaranteed. You can come inside, outside, and all over the new Burger King burgers. This burger will make your skin soft and your asshole tight. Our estrogenizing burgers will give you tits the size of basketballs, and that's no cap.
His body is going to start digesting his intestines now, which is the other logical hiccup in the script. If he can't start the digestive process without killing, how is his body actively digesting his intestines? It's not like he's eating up muscle or fat reserves. He specifically says his gut is eating itself. And if there's a point where his intestines simply turn on with or without the presence of food, well, that possible biological mechanism wouldn't care if it's raw, fresh meat or packaged meat. Hell, even meat paste like the astronauts eat would be fine. It's the same chemical material when it's chewed and processed in his guts, so what gives? Sorry, maybe it's just my being a reviewer having to watch this episode multiple times to prep for the review, but it's just, this is Rev's final episode, and the fridge logic is hurting an otherwise beautiful piece here. Like, being generous, we can say he was designed by the Abyss to be like that, a way to guarantee, even if he's out of contact with his foot soldiers of the apocalypse, that they will still savage and cause chaos in his name. But Andromeda prides itself on being slightly harder sci-fi than Star Trek. Literally needing to explain away a major plot point as a wizard did it hurts that. But let's not allow that to taint this excellent scene where Rev tells us what's really eating away at him. The hunt feeling good. That's like, as in the thrill of the hunt, not like he and Dylan are having... Never mind.
And I recognize something. It completed my creation. Becca, I liked it.
While Dylan and Becca discover a series of transport tubes, that is, a mass driver that was once used to propel metal from the ground into space. They get to work on turning the squirm poop into extra coils to glide the Maru into the launch tube, while Tyr is off making friends. We've skipped this particular subplot until now, but the gist of what you need to understand is that these Nietzscheans helped Tyr steal what is the bones of Drago Museveni, the same item that enshrined in the Kodiak habitat when Tyr was a child. He hired these mercs to steal the bones back from the Drago Kazov Pride, but the mercs were under the impression that they were going to ransom the bones back to the dragons, whereas Tyr never intended any such thing. He left them all to die, and now they want payback. Tyr's negotiations go about as well as you'd expect a negotiation devised by Tyr to go.
Because you're just so uncompromisingly inferior!
Back on the Andromeda, we've been dealing with Harper's existential crisis in brief cutaways, but that I haven't shown you because they really don't add much, finalizing in this final bit, where Rami has had a malfunction due to her battle damage and now needs Harper to manually fix what's going on. Harper says he wants to die, but Rami has had enough of his pity party.
What about inside of me? The only reason we encountered the Magog world ship in the first place is because some backup copy inside of me, I didn't even know existed, came out and started shooting, tried to kill us. All of us.
That does the job. Rev and Becca get one final conversation, with Rev expressing that he desires death, much like Harper. But in his case, it's down to his being created by the Abyss, and if so, then his death could only be a moral thing. Becca tries to get him to hang on, saying that Rev cannot know the Divine's plan for him, but she's only digging the hole deeper. Rev sees himself now as Bloodmist did, outside of the Creator's design. Dylan rescues Tyr from his friends, and the Maru shoots out of the tunnels as the Nietzscheans are torn apart by the squirms. Dylan has looked into outstanding bounties, and surprise, he's found Tyr. The dragons want him, and they want him alive. There's a new dynamic between Dylan and Tyr in Season 2, and it is a sublime dynamic now that the writers really know how to play the two off each other. Previous showdowns between these two always gave Dylan an air of a lofty idealist who treated Tyr as that rascally Nietzschean, kind of like how the crew treats Bender over on Futurama. We can't trust him, but he's our friend, and what's a little conspiracy between pals? And Tyr would regard Dylan as an idealist with his head in the clouds, but what can you do? He's my buddy. That's gone now, and Dylan will begin treating Tyr as another threat to be assessed and outmaneuvered for the rest of the series. And Tyr's machinations are scaled far back. The brazen attempt to seize the Andromeda in double helix was over the top. Now his scheming is much more subdued, but much more threatening. I think part of it is that scale. Like, obviously, Tyr isn't going to just kill Dylan and take over the Andromeda. This is Dylan's show, after all. That's just cheap drama to us. But here, we've seen Tyr take the bones of the progenitor, squirrel them away, and manipulate everyone in the episode so he comes out squeaky clean and blameless. We don't really understand Tyr's endgame beyond a vague proclamation that the bones are the key to the future of the Nietzschean people. But we don't even know if we can believe that. It makes the tension of watching him work far more palpable because we, the audience, aren't entirely sure what the final play will be.
Your move.
It's a much more mature form of storytelling and how the show will depict Tyr this season, and only this season, sadly. The conversation between them is one of the best, only outshined by the magnificent scenes that these two will get in Una Salis Victus later in the season. Again, I want to stress, we often make fun of Captain Hercules, even on this show, but Kevin Sorbo is fine as Dylan, and in moments like this, he really is good enough to match the material. Like, don't misunderstand, he's still Sorbo, warts and all, but there's an identifiable Samuel L. Jackson character, right? But he's still good in those roles, and I really genuinely feel the same here. Was Sorbo the best choice for Dylan? Maybe not. Maybe there is a theoretical better Dylan performance in your perfect scenario, but I would dare say that the detractors should watch this and say that he isn't carrying his weight. Regardless of if this is the writers finally figuring out how to write around Sorbo's limitations as an actor, or Sorbo putting his Sorbo spin on the material, the end result is still quality. There's a ruthlessness to Dylan now and his actions that wasn't present in season 1, and Sorbo's himbo-esque attitude is very unsettling in the juxtaposition. The Machiavellian smiler, and I think it serves the character extremely well. Are we done? Fuck, I need to wash my mouth out with something. Jesus Christ, that was difficult. Final assessment is that exit strategies should be considered mandatory viewing. This is Rev's last focus episode in the Coda era, and State delivers possibly his best performances of the series. Add on to that the shift in the dynamic between Tyr and Dylan as a bonus point, and I think this meets the threshold. This is no arc story, not really, but in paying respects to one of the series' regulars, I think we can fudge the rating up a bit. The biggest thing about this episode is Rev Ben's swan song. We didn't know it at the time, and certainly the crew didn't, and possibly not even State himself. But this is the last time Rev Ben gets a focus episode of his own, and he only has one appearance remaining that can't generously be described as a glorified cameo, in All Too Human. Even before the decision to kick Wolf off the big chair was made, State was being written out of the show. Material that by rights should have been his being transitioned to other characters, primarily trans. That makes this hard to look at from an outside perspective as a viewer. For example, take my earlier rant about the broken Magog physiology we got here. I tried to fridge brilliance it away by saying that we could hand-wave those inconsistencies by saying it was a deliberate design by the spirit of the abyss to torment his creations if they didn't follow his plan to the letter. But we'll never be sure. Because this is the end. Maybe it was a design that Rev would have found a new harmony in the knowledge that his creator god made him to be a tool and not be a person, and make it easier for him to turn against that creator. Or maybe it was just junk sci-fi science done for drama. We can't say one way or the other because of the unfortunate circumstances surrounding Brent State's time on the show. But assuming that framework, that this was merely an early step in Rev's journey and not a complete whole, it paints us a good picture of where Rev's mindset is at this point in time. We know that the plan in Coda was for Rev Bem to become a messianic figure for the Weists, taking control of the church and using the Magog babies he had spawned with the Hejira to form a holy army. I think this episode is demonstrative of the first step in that plan, by having Rev's journey mirror that of the Buddha. Well, wait, Double D, you are no doubt saying. You're going to have to explain yourself on that one. How is Rev like the Buddha other than the fact he's a monk? Friar Tuck was a monk, and that doesn't make him the Buddha. Well, actually, we have to go on the depiction of the ascetic Buddha, as Siddhartha was in his early life of enlightenment. If you don't know the story of the Buddha, the short version is this. Siddhartha Gautama was born into Indian nobility and was raised in a very privileged life as a landed warrior. Upon discovering well into his age how the poor suffered and becoming dismayed with the innate suffering of human life, Siddhartha renounced his heritage and possessions and sought salvation, going out into the world to learn about the human condition from the great religious teachers of his time. The first stage in that journey ultimately culminated in Siddhartha becoming an ascetic. We're talking mean ascetics here, not just the foregoing of vices, but literally starving oneself to death to find enlightenment. I believe that this episode is depicting that first stage. Rev has, albeit not entirely by his own design, starved himself into having a revelation, and it is the obsession with his food that brings him to realize he misses food, much like the Buddha. But what remains in the ephemeral space is the tale parallel to Siddhartha's renunciation of asceticism as the true path, when a young girl gives him rice pudding and his 5 companions abandon him, believing that he has lost sight of his religious path. But Siddhartha realizes that there is a middle between starving himself and indulging his whims, a controlled, focused path that acknowledges the needs of the body without allowing them to overwhelm his soul. I think that this would tie in well to a path where Rev discovers a righteous form of eating, and therefore killing, as we establish in this episode. And perhaps the sight of him feeding on an enemy would drive the 5 Andromeda crewmates from him. This provides the necessary middle step to Rev leading a holy army of Magog in battle against the Spirit of the Abyss in the climax of the series. Remember, Rev said that hunting his fellow Magog completed his creation. And it's not a stretch to think that he'd find a practical use for that revelation later down the line. This isn't even that weird for sci-fi, as Jakar over on Babylon 5 underwent a much more dramatic transformation in his ethics and worldview by this point in TV history. Now, could this just be me finding patterns where they don't necessarily exist? Maybe. But the details line up so well that I wouldn't be surprised to learn this was at least a rough framework. The story arcs in Andromeda seem to be planned more as bullet points. The episode where Rev learns to eat people would fit into the structure we can infer existed under Wolf's tenure, probably as a pin deeper in Season 2 or sometime in Season 3. Sadly, I still don't have access to a copy of Sailing the Slipstream, so such speculation is all I can offer, with hard facts being limited.
Shocked to learn that Book 1 and 3 were not immediately available. I had to wait a week and a half before the store could find the books for me. This was obviously a serious problem. I tried to contact Marvel and the publisher, Berkeley Boulevard Books, but I got nowhere. I then found out the reason the books were so hard to find was because Marvel was phasing out its paperback book division. I felt cheated.
However, Jill Sherwin did announce that publicly that she's going to do a reprint of the book in spring of 2023, so hopefully we'll all have access to that resource again and flesh out some of these fan theories a bit more. All said, it's not a surprise that Bob Engels would bring the character back for a proper send-off in Season 3, which, silliness aside, I regard as magnificent considering that by that point we had strayed from Coda so much it would have been pointless to continue that plotline. It was nice to see the show give Rev a fond farewell worthy of his character. And then he brought Rev back in Season 4 to assassinate his character, so I take back what little praise for Bob's run of the show I had in the previous sentence. But that is, of course, Rev. Tyr also had some focus this episode, and we're going to hop back into Season 1 and follow exactly Tyr has been getting up to that prompted the attack in this episode, next time.
My lord, I didn't realize. I came to see if you needed help.
My lord, where am I?
You're on Midden.
Reverend Bohemio! You dead?
Tyr Anasazi of the Kodiak Pride. Clearly I am not in heaven.